Troglodyte warning. I have an insane clip from GB News that makes a really interesting admission and poses a lot of questions about the far right in the UK and denial about beliefs that certain people hold. So let's get straight into the video and break it down.
Obviously, we have to cover the horrible breaking story, and that is moving on. And tributes have now flooded in for the 9-year-old boy, Andre Glessner, who has been named as the youngest victim in the German Christmas market attack.
Yes, and taking to social media, his mother called him "my little teddy bear" and said he would always live in our hearts.
The attack left 5 dead and over 200 injured, with some remaining in a critical condition.
Well, that's as the hard-right Alternative for Germany prepared to march near the scene of the attack, with German authorities coming under fire after warnings about the suspects were reportedly received last year but deemed unspecific.
Oh, well, joining us now is political commentator Andy Williams to bring us up to date on this story. Andy, it's a difficult conversation to have at any time of year. Obviously, the fact that it is so close to Christmas. This poor little boy has now been named 9 years old. His mum's given an incredible tribute when you read it, and it's one of those things that's like, OK, right, and breathe. What does this mean now for the political situation in Germany? We know there's a far-right march taking place today. What does it mean for the political situation in Germany and, by extension, the whole of Europe?
Well, firstly, obviously, it's a really horrific incident. And I think we have to, as you rightly did, Dawn, prioritise saying that and recognising that, and particularly at this time of year. I think there are obviously questions for the security services to answer. The fact that that car was able to drive into the Christmas market was, as far as I've read, a security failing in itself. So that's a problem. But in terms of the political situation, I am not surprised, but I'm also completely horrified that the AfD, which is, let's be absolutely clear about it, a neo-Nazi party. It is not a right-wing party. It is a far-right party in Germany. And that they have decided to march on the area shows exactly how they are willing to exploit horrendous incidents like this for their own disgraceful political gain. And I think we need to be really wary now about parties like the AfD gaining even further traction. And let's be clear, they're already polling very well in Germany. They won their first statewide election recently. They do not have the answers to the problem that we're talking about here. This is not about immigration. This is about a madman who has, of his own volition, for whatever reason, decided to do something totally unconscionable.
And Andy, there is clearly a lot of anger in Germany.
It's not about immigration. It's about this guy who is a terrorist, an anti-Muslim terrorist, pro-Israel terrorist, who, again, has tweeted support for the AfD. And who are the AfD? Well, they're a far-right nationalist party from Germany who started in 2013. They started out a lot more moderate than they are now as a Eurosceptic party. And over the years, the last 10 years or so, they've become more hard-right, more far-right. And the three tenets of their ideology and far-right ideology is a opposition to immigration, particularly Muslim immigration, a opposition or denial of man-made climate change, and German ultranationalism. And it's interesting GB News are calling out the far right here and actually calling the AfD far right. And it's interesting when you look at the comments on this video, complete denial about the AfD being far right. No one's accepting it, that no one's saying, yeah, the AfD, what they represent is disgusting. They have links and lineage to the neo-Nazis. They're a neo-Nazi party, essentially. No, they're in complete denial, and they're saying, oh, it's actually, look at the comments on this video. It's insane, the level of denial. And where does that come from? Well, I think it comes from the fact that since 2009, when the BNP disbanded, Nick Griffin knew he had to change the optics. He had to professionalise the party. And it's interesting who else uses that phrase. So he knew he had to be more moderate in his language, more disciplined in how he spoke about his ideas. And it's interesting again because Nigel Farage said, I single-handedly disbanded the BNP. And there's a subtext to that because a lot of his supporters went over to reform, and he knew that if he wanted to gain popularity and become more mainstream, he had to moderate his language. He had to use racist dog whistles. He had to be more kind of, I suppose, a plausible deniability of, oh, well, no, we're not far right. We just love our country. We just have concerns about our towns and cities and all these racist dog whistles that you often hear, legitimate concerns. So, again, a political ideology that denies reality, denies scientific consensus, denies all the data of anthropogenic climate change, of course, is going to be in denial about their own beliefs. And you hear it constantly. I'm not far right. I'm just right. Or, these views were, moderate 30, 40 years ago. That's not an argument to say that you're not far right. Yes, we've progressed a lot in the last 30, 40 years on many issues, gay issues, trans issues, women issues. And again, it's pure denial. That's it, really. There's no other way of saying, like, oh, how do we explain this? It's denial about what your ideology represents. And you only ever see this on the far right. It's not a liberal thing. Like, often you never hear, like, a liberal very rarely calls himself liberal. Often far right, ironically, call themselves liberal. Classical liberal, as they call themselves. Sargon of Akkad is a classic example. Because he can't just say, oh, I'm a fascist. I mean, he probably does now a bit more. Although, again, he still pretends like he's a classical liberal. Because the UK has a very specific relationship to fascism. Germany, the AfD can be more mask off. They can be honest and just say how they feel. They can just go off because there is that history there in Germany. But we don't have, I mean, we do have a history of fascism in the UK, but it's not, we pride ourselves in fighting fascism. And we're a very liberal country. In many ways, we invented modern liberalism, like Adam Smith, capitalism, democratic values, the free market. Liberalism kind of began in the UK with the Industrial Revolution. So it's pure denial, but it's interesting. It's interesting to see it on GB News because Nigel Farage has part stakes in GB News, part ownership, and I think what's happening here is that they have to distance themselves from the AfD. Even though Nigel Farage has been to AfD meetings and has links with the AfD, they have to make them seem like the extremists. And it's very clever, really, because you make them seem like the extremists and it's like, oh no, we're just being moderate. Like, we have nothing to do with them. And they have to distance themselves. They have to be in denial about the logical conclusion of their beliefs and what they truly believe. And I think a lot of people, a good majority of these people, don't even really know what they believe. Like, they don't know what this really means. Like, they don't grasp what their beliefs actually stand for. And they genuinely just think, oh, I care about my country. Or they buy into these dog whistles and obfuscations. And that's the worrying thing, because then how do you deal with that? How do you convince somebody that they're being lied to, that their beliefs, like, people know that, like, Farage knows these people on the right, they know they're grifters, they know what they're doing. But how do you convince people like that? It's very difficult when they don't trust you anyway. They don't believe anything you say. They think you're lying. So it's like, you know, I think we should listen to people. But if they don't listen to you, you can't have an argument. You can't have a dialogue about what's actually going on. So let's continue with the video.
At this incident, and you've mentioned for perhaps security failings of lack of barriers at certain entrances of this German Christmas market. The Interior Minister for Germany is saying that the heads of domestic and foreign intelligence in Germany are going to be questioned by a parliamentary committee, suggesting that there was some intelligence failure as well. So should people's anger be directed towards authorities rather than immigration or immigrants?
I would have said so. I mean, from what
I think that goes without saying. If this guy, there was a relationship with surveillance services and they failed, they are the one who, I'm sorry, responsible for this. If they knew he was doing certain things, they knew he was an anti-Islamic activist who had a following, who had reach and was on their radar, why wasn't he brought in? Why weren't they monitoring him?
I've read this, the suspect was first sort of reported to the authorities as far back as 2013 in terms of making threats of violence, you know, other sort of incidents, and that's 11 years ago. So the fact that he was allowed to continue living, you know, normally in society without being at least questioned, at least sort of apprehended in some way, there are obviously serious questions. My question to people who would say, well, the AFD, good on them, and their march, they've got the answer is, somebody who's lived in Germany for 18 years, who came to work as a doctor, a highly qualified psychiatrist, how do you stop people like that, who have lived in a country for 2 decades, suddenly committing a horrendous act of violence? The answer is not that you close your borders.
GB,
Yeah, but that's all they have, are these very simple, very chauvinist solutions. They're very complicated problems. Oh, you've got problems of Islamic terrorism, which is a real problem. We need to address it. But it's very hard when the people on the far right are essentializing these people. And we can talk about Islamic terrorism in a non-racist way, because not every Muslim is a terrorist. Actually, very few statistically. So we need to challenge this rhetoric and also recognize that the irony of the GB News actually calling this out and again push back against the denial of what the people on the right believe and how their views have become normalized. The Overton window has shifted, and anti-immigration, anti-climate change, ultra-nationalism has been normalized, and it's only going to continue because we are more divided than ever. A lot of the population are now, the two most favorable ideologies are feminism and environmentalism. That's the majority. So you've got people arguably going more to the left, more progressive, and a certain amount of people going to the right. And things are only going to get worse before they get better. So comment below, where does this denial come from? From science, from the what your political beliefs represent? Where does this denial come from? Tell me in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.